Chapter 5. There's no smoke without fire. Porter drove to Haworth, passing through such places as Otley, Bingley and Harrogate along the way. Agatha Christie was found staying in a hotel at the latter, following her brief disappearance in 1926. The mystery of what had led her there still haunted the spa town. 33 years of urban existence left Porter unqualified for the Pennines. Its country lanes were unnerving, made worse by the high hedges demanding blind faith. "Welcome to our world," Porter heard her skeptics cry. Former farms populated the countryside. The tools of the trade had long since been replaced, however, with pot plants no self-respecting farmer would buy. A wave of second homeowners was washing over the country. Having left York in good time, heavy traffic in small towns was about to make her late. A copse looked disconcertingly familiar. She was sure she'd driven past it 10 minutes ago. A series of wrong turns, one resulting in a dead end, and Porter was all for giving up. The only thing stopping her was the thought of Mike's smug sneer waiting for her when she got back. Porter soon regretted that second coffee. The introduction of cattle grids forced her to succumb to her bladder. She parked by a gate and stared out of the window. Wilderness stared back. The rock and the hard place were never more fitting. "Damn it, Porter, get a grip," she cried, wrenching open the door and clambering over the gate. She failed to notice a farmer propping up the wall in her haste to get through her ordeal. He observed proceedings with interest. Porter shot behind a bush. A flash of black lace preceded a curse. It serenaded the valley and agitated the flock. Peering over the leafy parapet, Porter expected to be trampled, but the sheep were running in the opposite direction. Her relief was short-lived on spying the toothless grin. Unsure of whether to laugh or cry, Porter emerged and took a bow. The farmer was still laughing as she drove away. Porter finally reached Haworth without further mishap. Eddie's warning that the village was hell on the calves was well founded. Haworth cascaded down the side of a steep hill, with the Bronte Museum its crowning glory. Parking at the top of the hill was out of the question. Everyone else had had the same idea. Porter was forced to abandon her car at the bottom of Main Street and attempt the ascent. The village was swarming with visitors with varying levels of agility. Porter thought herself fit until geology set her straight. She was nearly at the midpoint when cramps set in. Feigning interest in a gift shop, Porter rested while waiting for the pain to subside. Her breathing eventually steadied enough for her to continue. Porter stepped off the pavement and narrowly avoided being hit by an octogenarian sprinting up the hill. The athlete was making light work of the climb. His age alone put Porter to shame. While it spurred her on, she was no match for the local, who was picking up the pace with every step. The athlete was long gone by the time she reached the top. Porter was recovering by the gates of St. Michael and All Angels Church when a woman marched past, wielding an umbrella. "Come on, team, we're almost there," she promised her flagging entourage. A man trailing behind her was an unnatural shade of purple. "Do not resuscitate," he puffed. His guide steered them into the graveyard to impart some local facts. The purple man stared longingly at a grave. Its mossy mattress was preferable to any further torture. Rain motivated the guide to seek refuge in the church, while Porter carried on to the museum. She entered via the gift shop and was greeted by an assistant struggling with a crossword. "You survived ill, then?" "Barely," murmured Porter, catching a reflection in the window. The dead had more colour. "I don't know how they manage it." The assistant drew attention to 4 women crawling towards the building. "It ain't natural lugging all that weight about." "Natural, Maureen. You're one to talk," her colleague remarked from behind a bookstand. "'Appen you're right." Maureen's hand strayed to pink curls. "Ticket for one, love." Porter told her she was there to see Mr. Clifton, and the curator was swiftly sent for. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Biggleswade," Mr. Clifton greeted Porter, before ushering her up to his office. Forced to curb her curiosity, Maureen went back to her crossword. "It's a bit of a mess," warned Mr. Clifton, leading Porter upstairs. The curator turned out to be the master of understatements. Every surface was inconvenienced. Porter stepped gingerly across a carpet of paperwork while Mr. Clifton cleared a chair. He offered her a coffee, but Porter declined on the back of her earlier misadventure. The curator helped himself before fumbling through paperwork for a coaster. He He finally settled on a bill. A guide's monologue drifted up from the garden while Mr. Clifton organised himself. The village boasted street signs in both English and Japanese, proving its draw. Fans come from all over the globe on a literary pilgrimage, said Mr. Clifton. They even brave the winter months. Porter admitted to missing the balmier south. You'll get a shock come December then. Siberia is considered mild in comparison. You're surviving. Porter detected a sudden twang. 21 years and counting. Mr. Clifton was proud of his achievement. He put it down to loving his job and having a very thick skin. Is that to protect you against the cold or local opinion? Asked Porter. Mr. Clifton confessed to both. Many still regarded him as an off-comment. Porter hoped that wasn't contagious. Thankfully not, but I'll forever be the new boy. A woman barged in looking flustered. I can't find the... Oh, sorry. I didn't know you had company. That's okay, Morag. What have you lost? The petty cash tin, claimed the woman, her eyes locked on Porter. I gave it to you this morning. You said you were going to check the receipts, Mr. Clifton gently reminded her. Oh, yes, silly me. It quite slipped my mind. Well, I'm here now. Do you need me for anything? No, thank you, Morag. Just sort out those receipts. Mr. Clifton smiled encouragingly. He waited for the tread of retreating feet. I'm going to tell my colleagues that you're writing a book about Charlotte. Mr. Clifton furnished her with a cover story. Porter didn't mind. Some clients preferred to keep her services to themselves. Reaching in her bag for her dictaphone, she balanced it on a column of invoices and pressed record. Why did you call PIU? Mr. Clifton eyed the dictaphone awkwardly. I'm a lousy scribe, said Porter, promising that only her colleagues would hear it. Mr. Clifton appeared to be having second thoughts. You're free to call someone else, said Porter, her methods being non-negotiable. She was about to withdraw the offending article when Mr. Clifton shook his head. Forgive me, but I'm new to this. Porter's expression softened. Mr. Clifton made a point of cleaning his glasses. I'll be the butt of everyone's joke if word gets out, but it's tricky keeping things under wraps here. The walls have ears. Attached to your colleagues, thought Porter. Why did you call PIU? She repeated. You can see for yourself, said Mr. Clifton, rescuing an envelope from his desk. It was crammed with photographs documenting the disturbances at the museum. The attacks were becoming more frequent and savage. On placing the images in date order on the desk, Porter was struck by three things. Firstly, activity was localised to a bedroom in the shop. Secondly, feathers had been found in the bedroom, but not the shop. And thirdly, the level of damage in both rooms had indeed worsened over time. What did you do with the feathers? Asked Porter. Mr. Clifton retrieved them from a vase on the windowsill. He was going to throw them away, but something had held him back. I don't know where they've come from. Porter admired the plume. Their whiteness was so pure it rendered them blue. She had discovered similar at other sites. Are they significant? Asked Mr. Clifton when she requested to keep them. Possibly. Mr. Clifton could hardly object. Someone has taken a dislike to Charlotte, said Mr. Clifton, pointing at a photograph of the shop. The author's books were ripped apart and strewn across the room, and it's her bedroom that's been targeted. Porter examined the picture. While Emily and Anne's works remained untouched, she was struck by the level of rage directed at Charlotte. Jane Eyre isn't that bad. Mr. Clifton smiled wryly. His 13-year-old son would disagree. Porter asked if the rooms were next to each other. Perhaps proximity connected the attacks. They're not even on the same floor, stated Mr. Clifton. And when did it start? A couple of months ago. Mr. Clifton had come in early one morning to be greeted by a shop in disarray. Assuming it to be the handiwork of a burglar, he alerted the police. Unfortunately, their speedy response failed to throw up any clues, as there were no prints or signs of forced entry. The board thinks someone was able to break in without the inconvenience of smashing a window. Mr. Clifton confessed to the odd latch being warped, but security has never been an issue before. Visitors come to see where Charlotte wrote her books, or walk in Emily's footsteps. They don't expect expensive objects and finery. The board? Queried Porter. The museum's 12 trustees. Was anything stolen? Mr. Clifton hesitated. Nothing of consequence. Let me be the judge of that, responded Porter. The slightest detail could transform an investigation. Kendal mint cake, Mr. Clifton relayed sheepishly. I know it's bizarre, but I find an empty wrapper on the shop counter after every attack. Porter hadn't come across a ghost with a sweet tooth before. I improved the museum's security after the first incident, but it hasn't made the slightest difference. So the board are now seeking alternative help, mused Porter. Mr. Clifton worried his glasses again, unwilling to meet her eye. Ah, you're seeking alternative help. They don't know I'm here. No, he responded. Why? Asked Porter. Mr. Clifton gave an embarrassed cough. Haven't you told them about the other attacks? Pressed Porter. I thought I could handle it myself, but I was wrong. But why did you call PIU? Porter attempted for a third time. I read an article about a woman being haunted by a poltergeist. Her complaints sounded eerily like mine. Porter asked if his colleagues or visitors had seen or felt anything unusual. Well, they've kept it to themselves if they have. People tend to avoid making a fuss around here. I'll be laughed out of the village if I tell the board that I think the museum's haunted. They might surprise you, said Porter, telling him ghosts had the potential to increase visitor numbers. She had recently investigated claims of spectral squatters at an old manor house in Sussex. The property was open to the public, and the owner was keen to verify the rumours because he offered ghost tours. Did you find anything? Mr. Clifton asked cautiously. No, the anecdotal evidence didn't hold up to scrutiny. All I found was poor insulation and bad plumbing. Suffice to say, the owner kept my findings to himself. I'll settle for the wind stealing through the pipes, said Mr. Clifton. Thankfully, all the incidents have occurred at night, but if something happens during opening hours and someone gets hurt, we might have to close the museum. Don't guess ahead of yourself, advised Porter. She talked him through what an investigation entailed, before leaving him to decide if he wanted to proceed. Porter was greeted by a downpour on her return to York. She cursed her lack of umbrella and made a dash for the hall. The security guard flashed her toothy grin as she squelched through reception. The office was deserted. Her colleagues were in the common room, getting ready for the weekly departmental meeting. Groaning, Porter dropped her bag on her desk and went to join them. Mike was hunched in the corner, scowling at Clarice and Sue. His shadowy companion was hovering nearby. Beryl entered the hostile environment soon after Porter, with Mike's intern John bringing up the rear. Beryl chose a seat near the door, while John considered his options. There was space next to Mike, yet he elected to squeeze in next to Porter. His hands trembled under the pressure of Mike's glare. Porter thought John wise to keep his distance from Mike, considering how the investigator treated him. She doubted Mike's intern would last a month. Fergus will be joining us shortly, and then we can make a start, Fergus finished for Sue. Sorry I'm late. Sue gave a strained smile. Fergus was late, 6 weeks in fact, with last-minute engagements usurping his commitment to his staff. But now he finally delivered his polished, if somewhat belated welcome speech, which concluded with Porter. We're glad you've decided to join the team. I know you are, thought Porter darkly. Mike remained deadpan throughout. Only a faint flush exposed his feelings. I'll leave you in Sue's capable hands. Fergus's exit was as smooth as his entry. Well, that was worth the bloody wait, muttered Mike. Beryl circulated copies of the list of cases. 3 new ones were up for grabs. Clarice quickly circled 2. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that the purpose of the meeting is to discuss cases, not for airing grievances, said Sue. Since when was feedback a grievance? Demanded Mike. I'm happy to discuss it with you afterwards. Sue adopted a breezy tone, transferring their attention to the list of cases. Porter told her to add the Bronte Museum. She thought it likely Mr. Clifton would agree to an investigation. Thanks, Porter. Do you have anything to add, Mike? Asked Sue. Apart from apathy, very little it turned out. Sue asked Mike to update them on his cases. Porter caught John staring longingly at the window during Mike's dull delivery. His impulse to jump was thwarted by a basement view. Even Sue struggled to stifle a yawn. Mike's tone grew less leaden on talking about his Trentham case. It involved a couple who had recently moved to a new housing estate. Reclaimed from what? Asked Porter when Mike told him the houses were built on reclaimed land. Mike ignored her. He told them the Newberrys slept in separate rooms. Finally hearing something of interest, Beryl looked up from taking notes. They not like each other? She asked pointedly. Mike's eyes narrowed. His wife had recently left him. Apparently the Newberry's arrangement was down to incompatible work patterns rather than relationship discord. The couple had been living in their new home for a few weeks when Mrs. Newberry confessed to her husband that the house made her uneasy. "Why'd they buy the house then?" asked Beryl. Mike told her they had bought off plan. Beryl appeared mystified. "They bought the house before it was built," said Sue. "But that is crazy, no? Who buys an house that does not exist?" 18 years in York, and the British was still an enigma. "A question for another time," asserted Sue. Mike scowled at Beryl before continuing. Mrs. Newberry was a nurse who frequently worked the graveyard shift. Returning in the early hours, she would indulge in 2 slices of buttered toast before falling into bed. Her husband could be heard snoring in the adjacent room. They had transplanted this custom into their new home. Not long after their move, Mrs. Newberry was performing her usual early morning routine. She had considered spreading strawberry jam on her toast, but refrained on the grounds sugar might unsettle her sleep. Mrs. Newberry was exhausted from being on her feet for 10 hours, and her bed had beckoned. She needed 8 hours sleep to feel human again, so being woken up by a figure looming at the end of her bed wasn't a welcome sight. Of course she had assumed it was her husband. Mrs. Newberry had asked him what he wanted. Her chagrin had deepened when he didn't respond. She had made a missile of her hairbrush when he continued to ignore her, and was horrified when it passed through his chest to strike the wardrobe behind. The intruder wasn't impressed. Pouncing on the duvet, he had proceeded to pummel his victim. "Hit," imparted Sue. Beryl closed her mouth. But Mrs. Newberry was no victim, and she had responded in kind. The fracas had drawn the real Mr. Newberry from his bed, but when he flicked on the light, the attacker evaporated. "Do you have any proof of the attack?" asked Sue. "She's covered in bruises." "It's not the husband," Mike snapped at the look straying between Sue and Porter. "He can't throw a bloody ball, let alone a punch." "Was that the only time?" asked Porter. Mike's snub drove John to whisper, "No, it happens most nights." Mike's eyes flashed. John would pay for that later. "She have to move house, no?" said Beryl, alarmed. "Let's not be hasty," interjected Sue. "Have you spent the night?" Mike snorted while John stared at his feet. His ears were bright red. Sue's smile faded. "What happened?" Mike's gaze flickered towards John. "Our Sleeping Beauty." John sank further. "Take a flask of coffee next time," Sue advised sympathetically. She was conscious he was doing night shifts after a full day of lectures. "There won't be a next time," growled Mike. "That's unfair," said Clarice. Mike detested interfering students almost as much as he loathed Porter. "Bloody interns, you all just need to grow up." Sue tried to change the subject, but Mike was having none of it. They should be able to manage their own bloody workloads. They're not even kids anymore. "And you should treat yourself to a bloody thesaurus," said Clarice heatedly. Beryl gave her a broad grin. "I'm in it, that." "Can't we just forget about it?" begged John. "No, it's the principle," snapped Clarice. Having heard enough quarrelling for one meeting, Sue quickly brought it to a close.